Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely gorgeous and fascinating novel about music and family and being on the road, all sorts of very interesting things coming together. And I am so excited to have this conversation. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure. My name is Juliet Izon, and I am a journalist and author based between New York City and the Hudson Valley. And the ENCORE is my debut upmarket book club fiction that comes out exactly 1 month from today when we're recording on March 3rd. And I have been sort of calling it a mix of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Daisy Jones and the Six. And it's about musicians and lost loves and family secrets and all that good stuff.
Mm, it's absolutely lovely. And it works so well as for parts of the story as a period piece set in the early aughts. I am the same age as all of these characters. And so the early scenes were very resonant for me. It's almost hard to accept that I'm old enough to have a life that where my youth now occurs in flashbacks, but um, but before we get into the book, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about your career and your journey to this novel. How did your career in journalism, how did it influence your approach to writing a novel?
Sure. So I've been in journalism more or less since I graduated from college. And I also am the same age as these characters, which is why the flashbacks weren't too difficult to research because I could just sort of mine my memories for that. So I started out doing a lot of nightlife and entertainment reporting. And I definitely drew on some of those early experiences as a red carpet reporter or, covering celebrities or things like that in the book as well. And then from there, I moved into more lifestyle writing, which is what I'm still doing today. So I focus a lot on food, travel, interior design. And so when my friends found out I was writing a book, at first they were like, wait, it's not nonfiction? And I was like, no. And they're like, oh, so is it about travel or food? And I was like, no. But I've always been a huge music lover. I go to, a billion concerts a year. My dad was a musician. It's always been something very near and dear to my heart. I'm just not a musician myself. But I don't know. I just was always really fascinated with music as a setting for a book. And I was interested in exploring fame from both sides of the lens, how it can be a gift, but also a curse. And that was sort of the where the initial ideas started wiggling out from.
Could you talk a little bit about, well, I'm going to talk about our three main characters eventually, but let's start with Anna. Um, I'd love if you could talk about what went into shaping her as a character. Um, and particularly, I think, let's talk about like her relationship to her career as a musician. There's something really interesting, and it comes up in the first scene about oh, how would you say it? Like the paradox of feeling the most authentic while you're performing, you know? So yeah, can you talk a little bit about her?
Yes. I love Anna. I don't know if I'm ever going to write a character that I love as much as I love her because she's very complex and I would imagine she's probably not the easiest person to get along with, but she's very fascinating. So Anna is a classically trained singer and pianist. When we see her at the early stages of the book, and then she goes on to become a very successful indie rock star. She's had a really difficult past that she would sort of prefer not to discuss or think about in any way. But I think one of the most interesting things about her is she really has this dual life where on stage, she's an incredible electric performer. She has very devoted fans. And then off stage, she's pretty taciturn and she sticks to herself. And I think a lot of what she struggles with as an adult is how to sort of rectify that duality and or that dichotomy and how to figure out to how to bring those two sides of herself together in a way.
That is so fascinating. And I think there's something that's, I don't want to say unique to artists because I don't really have the data to back that up, but something that happens, I think, a lot with artists, especially when it becomes a career, is that it gets very wrapped up in your personal life and your view of yourself, perhaps in a way it doesn't, like if you're an accountant or, because like you are living your dream when you're doing the artist's life. And that really comes out, I think, in her relationship with Will. So I'd love to talk a little bit about him, and particularly about like the messiness of relationships in our early 20s and how that sort of affects us down the road.
Absolutely. So I think so Will, there's three main characters. We've got Anna, who's our indie rock star, and Will is her best friend when she's young that she meets while they're both at conservatory, and he is an extraordinarily gifted composer and conductor. And I think one of the reasons why they get along so well as college students is that they both recognize in each other, um, I think not only their sort of shared prodigy, but he sort of sees through her in a way, and she lets him see her in a way that no one else can. And so they develop this really beautiful friendship over 4 years of college. And then there's one night where something happens and that sort of pulls them apart for many, many years. And I think a large part of where Anna goes emotionally is based obviously off that moment because it's a very pivotal part of the narrative. But I think missing him in those intervening years has formed a lot of her own artistic process. Um, and his as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about there are different types of absences in our lives, I feel like. There are those that we don't notice, and that don't really perhaps function as absences, but there are some where like that, person-shaped hole sort of remains in those intervening years. And it's interesting, by the way, off the record, if I reveal anything that you don't want to talk about, just let me know. I'll snip it out. So I'm trying to be very cautious.
I still haven't figured out myself as to like how much I should say or not say.
Yeah, it's hard.
So we're learning as we go.
Um, and when they come back together later, the person doesn't always fit back into that hole in the way that you think because you've both changed so much in the intervening years. So keeping it kind of broad, could you talk a little bit about the circumstances that bring them together and how perhaps like the personal gets all wrapped up in the professional in some really, really interesting ways. And perhaps like how relationships between artists are kind of complicated in and of themselves, because there's always like a little bit of like collaboration tinged with competition or, comparison. There's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on there.
Okay, so where to start with that?
Sorry.
No, it's great. They're all such good
Yeah.
questions. So I mean, I think even from reading the blurb of the book, this will not give anything away. I think it's pretty clear how the three characters are connected, even if it's not spelled out there. So essentially, what happens is Will and Anna get reconnected with a daughter that Will did not know existed when she's 16. Her name is Lottie. And all of three of them end up going on tour with Anna as a way to get to know each other. And so, like you were saying, I think Anna and Will have missed each other this entire time. But obviously, he's dealing with very different feelings than she is because while Anna knew of the existence of their daughter and gave her away, Will never knew she existed. And so he's rightfully furious at Anna. He's devastated that he's missed all these years with his own daughter. And then, all of them are forced into these extraordinarily tight confines on a tour bus. So that's sort of kindling for a lot of big emotions to come out in different ways. But I think pretty early on, Anna and Will see that there's still very much a connection there, but it's so much more complicated because the feelings on both parts are so layered, and there's good ones and there's bad ones, and they sort of begin finding their way back to each other through their music, which was sort of how they got connected in the first place as well. So it sort of makes sense that that would be their entry point in that way.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting too to have that dynamic where there's sort of like the forced closeness and relative isolation of like the tour bus, contrasted with the performance aspect of, being on the road and performing for people. And pinging back and forth between performance and authenticity, and then like losing track of what is authentic, who are we ourselves when we're performing or when we're off the stage talking. So there's a lot of really interesting emotional dynamics. I have a question about music, writing about music, that I always like to ask authors when they write about musicians. There's a quote from an author whose name I forget, that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. And I'd love to know what your process was for capturing music on the page.
I love that quote.
Mhm.
Although it's a stressful one
Yes.
if you're planning on writing really about any art medium, right? It's tricky to convey dance in word or painting or music, obviously. I think different authors have tackled it in different ways. Going back to Daisy Jones and the Six, I think one of the things that makes that book so fascinating is that it's told as a faux oral history. And so it's not really focusing on the music so much as it is on the interpersonal relationships between everyone in the band and how people remember things differently. And I thought that was such a clever way to talk about all the roiling emotions in a band like that one. For me, I think what was most interesting was the emotional impact of music on these characters and how it could pull them apart or push them together. And so, for that reason, I didn't include any of her own lyrics, for example. Um, it honestly, I think at first didn't occur to me. And then when I was reading other music books where they were putting fake lyrics in, I was like, you know what? I'm not sure I could tackle that well anyway. So I'll leave it out. But I think also, I didn't want to get too deep into the weeds of like she, played this chord and then they did this or whatever. And I tried to put enough in there for it to feel authentic. But at some point, you're going to lose the average reader if you're getting too technical because they're just not going to know what you're talking about. Um, but I think I also came to it as a music lover, right? And as someone who loves seeing live music and adores the artists that I follow closely. And so it was also trying to figure out, I think, how to weave in a bit of that of um, what someone like Anna would mean to her fan base.
That's a really good point about the lyrics. I didn't even notice their absence until you pointed that out. And I really like that move because it allows the reader to sort of, almost like in a Helen of Troy way, where they tell you she's beautiful, but they don't tell you what she looks like, that it allows the reader to have that control to sort of like insert the type of song that would make them feel that way, if that makes sense.
100%. And I think that was part of it for me is, if you say something like, this was the most beautiful song ever written, not that I said this in the book, and then you actually put lyrics in or you describe it, it's, well, how do you live up to that, right? I mean, I think about that. I don't know if you're a theater person, but in Hadestown, he's working on this beautiful song the whole show. And that song is truly, it's stunning, but I think a lot about when she must have been writing that the pressure, this
Yeah.
is a song that can make flowers erupt. Like that's a lot. It has to, it's some heavy lifting.
That is a lot to live up to. Yeah. Wow, that's very impressive. So my last question has to do with your research process in the foreword or the author's note to the novel, you mentioned an immersive fact-checking process. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that and what sort of research went into crafting this novel.
Oh, this was definitely one of my favorite parts. And I think as a journalist, I'm used to fact checking, I'm used to doing research. And so this sort of allowed me to pull from that area of my life into this. Um, so I initially, it was a lot of YouTube videos, right? I was looking up videos of students who are currently at places like Juilliard or Curtis in Philadelphia or Berkeley in Boston to get a sense of the rhythms of their day, right? When are they going to the practice rooms? Um, I didn't even realize that they called them practice rooms and not studios, and that sort of depends on school to school. So the faux conservatory that Will and Anna go to is very much an amalgamation of all of these very rarefied conservatories. And similarly, I found a tour manager who had this whole series on YouTube of very granular hour by hour schedules of what happens on a day that they're loading in and the day sheet that she uses to keep track of everything and what she's doing when the band's on stage. And it was fascinating. And not all of that made it into the book, but I think it was very helpful for framing just how hectic a day like that is and how draining it is on everybody. And also how it's not just the artist that's on stage, right? But you've got this whole ecosystem of people who no one ever knows about, but the show would never run without them. And then after I got the book deal and I could dive even a little bit more into fact checking in an immersive way, I basically just reached out to friends or friends of friends who were in the music industry. So that was everyone from a classical composer and pianist to a conductor to a sound engineer, a vocalist, a little bit of everybody. And I just either got them on the phone or met them in person and just, asked them not only questions about their job, but sort of fact checking from my book. Like, okay, is this what someone would say in this situation? And sometimes they'd be like, yes. And sometimes they'd be like, no, they'd be a lot more casual about it, things like that. And, my one friend, Claire, who's a singer, recorded her vocal warm-ups for me and sent me a video so I could see what she did. And my other friend, Ellis, has a band called San Fermin, and they let me come to sound check so I could make sure I got the order of operations right in terms of, when is line check and when is the actual sound check and what are people doing on stage while everybody's loading the speakers in or whatever. So that was fun. And, look, I'm sure there's still so many errors, but I did my best to try to fact check as much as I can.
That's a really good illustration of, why it's useful to both look at sort of the textbook stuff and to learn the jargon and the professional terms, but then also talk to the people who have the lived experience because, we don't all use that technical jargon all the time in our daily lives. And, we don't always yeah, there's something that feels very authentic about it. And it does really add to this sort of emotional pressure cooker that this situation is. This might sound a little bit like a tangent, but it almost reminded me of those early pandemic days, when we were all just like forced together in tiny spaces that we couldn't really leave, and how that really fast tracked a lot of emotional processes
Yes,
and relationships
absolutely.
and yeah.
You don't have anywhere else to go.
We have to work this out. There's no distractions, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating book and it's really beautiful. I love your writerly voice and the way that you describe I think the live music experience, both from the perspective of the artist performing and that sort of like the collective energy of the crowd, just feels really real and vivid.
Good. Thank you. That's what I was shooting for.
Great. So I know you're probably busy, with the lead up to this publication, but what's on the horizon for you? Are you writing right now or anything in the works?
Yes, actually. So I have just finished a draft of a second book that takes place in the art world, in the contemporary art world. And so, it's with my agent right now, and she's giving me some notes, and then we will see if my publisher is interested. Fingers crossed.
Nice. Oh, that's great to hear. I'm so excited to read the next one. And thank you for taking the time to share this book with me and our listeners.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thanks. Okay, listeners, please check out the Encore. When you hear this, it'll be out in the world, so you can head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for your books. Do you have a favorite bookstore you like to send people to?
Oh, I love Oblong Books in Rhinebeck, New York.
Lovely. Very good choice. All right. Well, that's it for us. Thank you, listeners. It is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.